Meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 17th of June 2025. The following members are present: Councillors Alec Allison, Ralph Barker, Arch Buchanan, Ross Clark, Jerry Convery, Margaret Cowie, Maureen Devlin, Colin Dewar, Mary Donnelly. With apologies from Councillor Joe Fagan. Councillors Alistair Fulton and Shalene Handybode are present. Councillor Graham Horn is not present. Councillor Cal Johnson Dempsey is not present. Councillor Ross Lambie is present. Councillor Martin Lennon is not present. Councillors Leslie MacDonald, Dave McLaughlin and Richard Nelson are all present. We have apologies from Councillor Norman Ray. Councillor John Ross is present. Councillor Graham Scott is not present. Councillors David Shearer and Helen Toner are present, and we have apologies from Councillor David Watson. Thank you, and I'll pass you back to the Chair for today's business.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Just before commencing today's business, I would ask members to note that items 4 and 5 in the agenda will be presented together before being determined separately. We'll go into today's agenda. Agenda item number 1 is any declarations of interest. There are no declarations of interest. Agenda item number 2 then is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 20th of May 2025, submitted for approval as a correct record. On pages 5 to 10, I will move these as correct.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. All agreed? Agenda item number 3 then is the application P241246 for the erection of 152 dwellings with associated infrastructure works and landscaping at land 235 metres south east of Whiteshaw Gate Cottage, Whiteshaw Gate Highway, Straven. These on pages 11 to 28. Fraser.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, this application relates to a site that's identified in the local development plan as part of the East Overton residential master plan area. As such, while the principle of the proposal is accepted, the details in the application have been subject to review and amendment, and in this context it is considered that the proposals that are now with the Planning Authority are acceptable and conform with the relevant national and local development planning policies. 110 letters of objection were submitted against the application, primarily on traffic and access details, but there were a number of other issues raised, with a summary of these provided at Section 7. Section 10 of the report presented to members provides an assessment of the proposals and addresses the representations that were submitted. It is noted that the application was significantly amended in April 2025 to include 38 affordable housing units. This change to the layout was accompanied by a revised supporting documentation, including an amended transport statement. After some concerns about traffic impacts within the East Overton development were raised, a further set of amended road drawings were submitted in May 2025. And following this submission, Roads and Transportation Services have undertaken a detailed review of the traffic generation and how this will be distributed through the existing East Overton development. This exercise identified that additional traffic from the proposals may have been inclined to use a section of Rickard Avenue, which was designed with no footways and would not be suitable for the proposed increase in traffic. But as such, additional traffic calming features have been secured in the design of the development to direct traffic along an appropriate route. The review of the distribution of additional trips from the proposals also highlighted that traffic would not be routed along the central area where the play park is located. The Road Service have advised that the whole of the East Overton site is designed with traffic calming to ensure speeds are less than 20 miles an hour, and reiterated that the existing roundabout on Glassford Road was originally designed for up to 480 dwellings, a cumulative figure which this further extension will not exceed. Contributions for investment into community facilities, education provision as well as affordable housing will be secured via Section 75 agreement, which will need to be completed before formal consent is issued. But with this being the case, it is recommended to the Planning Committee that planning permission should be granted for application P241246 subject to the conditions set out on pages 20 to 25 and following the successful completion of formal legal agreements. Thank you.
I open up for any questions or comments, please. If there are no questions or comments, then the recommendation is to grant, subject to conditions and the conclusion of a Section 75 legal agreement. I will move that recommendation.
I'll second it.
All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 4 and 5 is application P241527 for the erection of 28 flats with associated access road, parking, bike and bin enclosures, landscaping and demolition of double garage, and the application P241526 for the demolition of double garage and vacant land at Laidacre Road in Lanark, and these on pages 29 to 50. Fraser?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the items 4 and 5 are related. Item 4 seeks full planning permission for the erection of the 28 flats, while item 5 seeks conservation area consent for the demolition of the garage. Regarding the formal planning applications, members will recall that a scheme for 39 flats was refused permission in May 2024, and subsequent to this, the applicant has sought to redesign the scheme and to present a more appropriate layout and design for the site that leads to the recommendation to approve being presented to members this morning. 25 letters of objection and 10 of support were submitted following statutory consultation, and the details of this are set out in Section 7. Section 10 provides an assessment of the scheme and outlines why the proposal is now acceptable, and concludes in stating that it complies with the relevant development planning considerations. It is also noted that there are no objections from statutory consultees. Whilst not a planning consideration, the site is identified within the Strategic Housing Investment Plan for South Lanarkshire, and as such there is no requirement for the applicant to provide developer contributions. Given the above, it is recommended that, subject to the conditions set out on pages 39, 40 and 41, planning permission should be approved for the application P251527, and if this is agreed, that conservation area consent should be granted for application P241526.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. No questions or comments. I think I'll just make a comment just to say that I think it's good to see that this application has been returned by the applicant, which was previously refused by this committee. I think it was suggested at that time that this committee was against social housing. Let me be clear, that was not the case. We were not against anything. What we were against was the amount, and it didn't fit. And it was great to see that the work has been done by the developer and also the planners, and it gives me much great pleasure in recommending this application, subject to conditions along. I'll do that one first, sorry. Second it.
I'll second it.
All agreed? And application P241526, and that recommendation is a demolition of a double garage. I will grant subject to the condition.
I'll second it.
All agreed? Thank you. We'll then move on to agenda item number 6, please, is application P241545 for the erection of house at Eastford, B7016 from 4th, A706 to Carnwath, A70, 4th Lanark, and these on pages 51 to 58. Fraser? Thanks,
Chair. This application relates to a site within the Greenbelt, seeks consent for a 4 to 5 bedroom dwelling, which the supporting statement with the application says is for the daughter of the residents of an existing house in a nearby site. The application has not provided any information to suggest that this dwelling is required to support a rural business, or that there is an essential need for a dwelling to be located on this site. The site itself is grassed over, is around 50 metres from the residential dwelling at Eastford, which it is noted in the report contains structures within its extended garden ground that have not been the subject of formal planning applications. A poultry business exists around the same distance to the north of the application site, but this does not have a connection to the proposal. As set out in section 10 of the report to members, the proposal does not comply with a range of national and local development planning policies, and no evidence or information has been provided that would justify a departure from local and national development plan policies. Therefore, for the reasons set out in section 11, it is recommended application P241545 should be refused.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Chair. This application or refusal does concern me. The one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the requirement, if you like, for increasing the rural population, which I think is part of MPF 4. If we're not going to accept sites like this, it's not out in the middle of nowhere, it is within the curtilage of other buildings. The site you're saying is grassed over, I would say it's weeds. It's not really suitable for agriculture, I don't think. And I think if the guidelines are that we shouldn't be building here, then the guidelines need to change. I think this would be an ideal site for improving residences in the rural area. And I think I'm going to move that it's granted on these grounds.
Just before I come back to you, Councillor Allison, and I'll look for a seconder. Fraser, do you want to come in just on any of those points, first of all?
In terms of the local development plan policies as well as the national planning framework, there is a desire and a hope that we can grow the rural population, but the preference is that that's within existing settlements. There are a number of sites within settlements that are close to this site here. This one doesn't actually represent a gap site because it's actually just looking at an individual part of, as you say, a grassed over area just now. There's quite extensive grounds in the house that sits next to it. As I say, there's a property that doesn't have planning permission in the grounds that are next to it as well, which could act as ancillary accommodation. But we'll wait to see if a planning application can come forward with that one. But this proposal, as it stands, doesn't conform with local or national planning policies. And we would always tend to guide development to existing settlements. That then secures the services within existing settlements. It's the appropriate location for it. It means that people can get access to services as well. This one, it just doesn't conform with our policies.
Thank you. Councillor Barker, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that report. I'm maybe just asking for a repeat explanation. I totally support the principles of NPF 4. It's just looking at it, this would at one time have been considered a gap site. And I just wonder if you could just emphasise why it isn't considered that way under the new planning framework. Thanks.
Fraser?
Yeah, no, it's not within a settlement, which is its starting point and around it. The site isn't actually looking at a gap that sits between two built-up areas. It's quite a significant frontage that sits in here, and this would be just one part of it. It's not adjacent to either properties. It doesn't have a contiguous boundary with the residential property and the poultry business that sits on either side. So it's a standalone site. And as I say, it's not within a settlement either, so it doesn't fit with the definition of a gap site as it's presented within our development plan.
Thank you. Councillor Allison proposed a refusal. I'm looking for a seconder for Councillor Allison.
Granted, Chair.
Oh, granted, sorry. Granted, sorry, no refusal. Granted. I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Shearer.
Thank you, Chair. I will second Councillor Allison.
Thank you. Councillor Allison, can I just get you to go through the wording for that recommendation, please?
Is within, if you like, the curtilage of other buildings and therefore an ideal site to contribute towards the increasing the population in the rural area without being detrimental to either Greenbelt or the rural area.
Is there any further questions or comments before I bring this to a vote? Because I will move the recommendation as to refuse.
I'll second it, Chair.
We have an amendment from Councillor Allison, seconded by Councillor Shearer, that this application is granted.
Councillor Allison, Shearer, can I just clarify that it would be to grant permission subject to appropriate conditions being prepared by officers?
Conditions first. before the conditions were improved on.
Okay, Councillor Alison, that's fine. If we'll go to the vote, if it is refused, then we would need to bring it back to the committee with the conditions. Approved, sorry. If it's approved, I keep saying, if it's approved, then we'll bring it back and you can see the conditions then, sorry.
Okay, just to recap then, the motion is that the application be refused for the reasons detailed in the report. That's proposed by Councillor Nelson and seconded by Councillor Convery. The amendment is that planning permission be granted, subject to conditions that would have to be agreed at a later date. That's proposed by Councillor Allison and seconded by Councillor Shearer. The vote is now live. If members can please indicate your voting preference. It appears there's 2 members still to vote. If you can make sure you've indicated your voting preference, please. Okay, all members have now voted and I will close the vote. Ten members have voted in favour of the motion and 8 in favour of the amendment. I therefore declare the motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. We'll then move on to agenda item number 7, please. And that is application P250044 for the construction and operation of battery energy storage system with associated infrastructure and access points, which is consultation from the Scottish Ministers under Section 36 of the Electricity Act 1989 at land at Red Moss, B7078, Crawford, John and Biggar. And these are on pages 59 to 72. Fraser?
Thanks, Chair. This report, as you say, relates to an application that has been submitted to the Scottish Government's Energy Consent Unit, and as such, in this instance, the Council is a consultee and not the decision-making authority. The proposal itself relates to a vacant site that previously contained the Red Moss Hotel and truck stop, and the site is adjacent to the location for a proposed electricity substation that is the subject of a separate planning application. If approved, the battery storage facility would connect to the substation, and in terms of the consultation that has been carried out by the Planning Service, no adverse comments have been received against this proposal. With regard to the assessment against the relevant development plan policies, policies 1 and 2 of the National Planning Framework seek to encourage uses that address the impacts of climate change, and at the same time, policy 18 of the South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan provides the local policy context, and again, it is noted that this policy context is favourable. A number of conditions have been recommended, and contributions will be sought for community infrastructure, but this will be a matter that will be determined by the Energy Consents Unit as the decision-making body. So therefore, as there are no conflicts with local or national planning policy or practical considerations which raise concerns, it's considered that in this instance no objections should be submitted as a formal response from South Lanarkshire Council to the Energy Consent Unit of the Scottish Government.
Thank you, Fraser. Open up for questions or comments. Councillor Ross Lambie, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Fraser. Just looking at this one, back in the February Planning Committee meeting, we had a couple of battery storage applications come in, and they were small enough that we did have the decision-making powers, and they had a similar reason for approval, or in this case, non-objection, which was that they were adjacent to existing bits of infrastructure. So in both of those applications in February, the battery storage proposed was next to existing substation compounds, whatever the right phrase is. So there was the roads, machines and equipment and all that kind of stuff. So it seemed a logical extension to that compound of, infrastructure. And seem to be using the same justification to not object to this one. If I can just grab it'd be on page 94. in the conclusion section, it says the site is in close proximity to existing electrical grid infrastructure. But in this case, it's not like a substation or existing compound of loads of gear. There's just a pylon happens to pass through the area. So I'm just a little bit nervous about us setting that as a principle, that you can negate the concerns about the green belt being developed, being industrialised, if there happens to be a pylon nearby that they can connect onto. Because I guess if we as a planning committee adopt that as our principle, then it opens up, you'd imagine, great swathes of rural Lanarkshire to battery storage applications, where if they happen to have a pylon line passing through them. Just wonder what your thoughts on that, my interpretation of that is.
Yeah, no, in terms of this particular site, it's not within the Greenbelt. Previous refusals that have the decision been taken by this committee, they've identified sensitive areas in the Greenbelt that didn't have any connection to any sort of electricity infrastructure and considered that the proposals were unacceptable. We've also sought to refuse them in areas that are strategic employment locations, because again, it's considered that these battery storage facilities aren't big employment generators. So there have been other policy considerations that have been taken on board in terms of the decisions of the planning authority. In this instance, we're not actually the planning authority, we're a consultee. But there is a separate planning application that will be coming forward in terms of an electricity substation, which is quite far advanced in terms of the design and the details around that. We have a limited period of time in which we can submit an objection or no objections to the Scottish Government about these proposals. If we submit an objection, it can take us down the line of public inquiries, it can take us down the line of sort of legal challenges. In this instance, we are aware that because we're not the decision-making body and there aren't any other policy considerations that really would go against this proposal, I think that's why we feel as if it's a no objection, is the comment from South Lanarkshire Council, but that doesn't then, that's just something that gets fed into the Scottish Government, who will make the eventual decision on the proposal itself.
Supplementary, Councillor Lambie.
Yep, thank you. So two things there. Did you say, I think you said this is not the Greenbelt site, which I'd find staggering because it's basically hillside. The second thing you mentioned was the adjacency to infrastructure. Are you suggesting that's based on a future application for a substation that doesn't yet exist? Thanks.
Fraser?
The green belt is defined in terms of the area that sits around the settlements. It predominantly wraps around our major settlements. This area is within the rural area, so it's a site within the rural area. And yes, it does relate to other infrastructure that's proposed and is within the plan. There's also quite a significant amount of other electricity infrastructure within this area, and that's again the site itself is it lends itself to the type of development that's proposed. So that the consideration here is there no grounds for South Lanarkshire Council to object to it.
Thank you, Fraser. Councillor Mary Donnelly, please.
Thank you, Chair. This has come up quite a few times in my ward, and it's been reported to local groups that where there is battery energy storage systems, they have actually gone on fire. So are we mindful of that they could be a fire hazard?
That's not a planning consideration, Councillor. It's something that we know that there's also not a lot of information around that. No, there's a lot of social media discussion around that, but there isn't sort of a lot of information. It wouldn't be a planning consideration, but the considerations in your ward for a battery energy storage system are very different from this site here.
Is there any further questions or comments then? Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make it clear to people who maybe don't know that area, and although we don't know exactly which other renewable energy proposals will receive consent, but that area is in the middle of a generally industrialised renewable energy patch with several other proposals. It's not just a standalone, or it won't be just a standalone. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barker. Comments are noted. If there are no further questions or comments, then I will read the recommendations that we will be approving. Is that the Scottish Government Energy Consents Unit is informed that South Lanarkshire Council has no objection to the granting of consent under Section 36 of Electricity Act 1989, and number 2, that the Head of Planning and Regulatory Services to be authorised to undertake any discussions with the Scottish Government Energy Consents Unit, including in relation to conditions to be attached to the consent if required. I will move those recommendations.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Anyone otherwise minded? Thank you. Agenda item number 8 then is P250087, and that's for the subdivision of Garden Ground, demolition of detached garage and carport, and erection of dwelling with associated works at Trickle Trout, High Flat Road, Carmunnock, pages 73 to 80. And I'll ask Fraser again, please.
Thanks, Chair. This application relates to a site that's located in the Greenbelt between Carmunnock and East Kilbride and seeks consent for the erection of a 2-storey dwelling within the grounds of an existing residential property. The site is located in the Greenbelt, as I say, and no justification or information has been provided to suggest that the proposed dwelling needs to be located at this site or is related to an appropriate agricultural or Greenbelt or rural activity. The proposed development does not comply with the requirements of South Lanarkshire's adopted Greenbelt policies and furthermore runs contrary to the relevant policies in the National Planning Framework. So as such, this proposal is unacceptable and not compliant with planning policy, and for the reasons set out in section 11 of the report presented to members, it is recommended that planning permission should be refused.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for questions or comments, please. If there are no questions or comments, then the recommendation is to refuse. I will move that as a refusal.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed. Thank you. Agenda item number 9 is application P250164 for the erection of house and associated infrastructure at Tinterview Road, Ashgill and Larkhall. These are on pages 81 to 88. Fraser again, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this application also relates to a site within the Greenbelt and is located along a privately owned track, some 590 metres from the settlement of Ashgill. The proposal is not related to an existing business, nor is there any information provided that it would meet the planning policy requirements for a new dwelling in the Greenbelt. The site previously housed infrastructure associated with a water tank, but this has naturalised through time, albeit the recent excavations have revealed the foundations of the former tank. The applicant's agent has submitted late representations to the Planning Service outlining the applicant's medical condition, and while noting this information and having sympathy for the applicant, this in itself does not provide sufficient justification to make an exception to the adopted planning policies against which residential development needs to be assessed. So therefore, for the reasons set out in section 11 of the report, it's recommended that application P250164 should be refused.
I'll open up for questions or comments, please. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Fraser for the report. I suppose I'm probably just looking for some more clarity on the reasons for refusal. Note the points about the situation within the green belt, but it does also note in the report its proximity to a settlement and the fact that it's in walking distance of Ashgill and of a bus stop, and generally that proximity to a settlement. So would that not also be a mitigating factor in it not being seen as an unsuitable development there because of its proximity there? And also it mentions in the reasons for refusal, contrary to Policy 9, does not represent sustainable reuse of land. I'm taking that from this, the main reason for that refusal is on that ground is because of the naturalisation of the land. Because I note that in relation, not in relation to Policy 9, but in terms of 13 and 14 of NPF 4, it's not significantly significantly contrary to those policies in terms of sustainable travel and local living because of its proximity to Ashgill. Just looking for some more explanation around those reasons.
Yeah, no, in terms of the site today, and probably even looking at the agenda we've had, as you see, there's quite a demand for single houses and houses that are not within settlement boundaries. The South Lanarkshire Council policy in terms of local development plan, the drive is to try and encourage new development in existing settlements. And as I say, that's to sustain services, to try and promote active travel, to try and just to promote the opportunities that exist within settlements and for economic growth as well. This particular site here, it's 600 yards from the edge of the settlement. So while that is in its walking distance, it's not within the settlement boundary. The site has naturalised, so it's grassed over through time, but the area has been cleared, but it has naturalised over time. And again, that means that it's not the reuse of a redundant building, it's not the reuse of property, so it doesn't, again, comply with our policy. The medical information was provided by the applicant's agents quite late on, but there isn't anything that would actually justify or require a house in that specific location, and that's what we need in terms of Greenbelt policy. So it just doesn't provide the information that would require to identify a house at that particular location, and it would be running contrary to the main drive of our policies, which is to try and encourage development within existing settlements.
Mary Donnelly, please.
Thank you for that explanation, Fraser, but I'm still sitting a bit uncomfortable. My sister suffers fibromyalgia, and I know how her quality of life is really, really poor. So I don't know where we can go with this. Can we defer? What's our options here rather than just going refusal? Because I'd like to see where they're talking about building and if there's any mileage for us to go here in order to listen to what the applicant's looking for.
No, thanks, Councillor. No, sympathy with your sister, and I recognise the debilitating nature of the illness that the applicant has, but there isn't a justification for a house at this particular location here. We haven't had any information in terms of medical certification which would that proves that there's an essential need for the house to be located at this location. As I mentioned as well, it's 600 metres from existing, from the settlement boundary, so where there may be services and the like as well. So it's while recognising and sympathetic towards the medical needs of the individual, that doesn't override the planning policy considerations. So it would be a big deviation from policy. And there doesn't really seem to be any justification for a separate dwelling house on this location. Planning policy does allow for ancillary sort of granny annex types of proposals where it can provide a degree of care within a family environment, but this is for a separate dwelling house, so that's why it doesn't conform with the policy, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Fraser. Councillor Clark, and then we'll bring it to a close.
Thank you, Chair, for taking me again. Thank you to Fraser for those explanations. If this is refused, is there any role for the Planning Department to have conversations with the applicant to look at other suitable sites that might conform with planning policy? I know that that's always the case. We're just looking for that confirmation.
We have provided that advice in the past. There has been development that has been refused by committee and refused under delegated power about this separate dwelling house. But ancillary accommodation might be something that works. It might not meet the needs of the applicants, but we're open to have that discussion with them.
Also, to be mindful, Fraser, that the reason that they've obviously picked that location is the sensitivities around the person that's suffering fibromyalgia and light, noise. So they've got a whole load of medical reasons why they did pick that site to have that comfort and that quietness. So it would be good if there is a conversation to be had to help them along their way.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. I will then move that the recommendation is to refuse. I will move that recommendation.
I'll second it.
All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 10 then, please, is application P250274 for the construction and operation of battery energy storage system with associated infrastructure and access point, and that's a consultation from Scottish Ministers under Section 36 of the Electricity Act 1989 at land 1.7 kilometres south of Millbank A70 to Abington interchange at the A702 in Douglas. And these are on pages 89 to 100. And I'll ask Fraser again.
Thanks, Chair. As was the case with item 7, this report relates to an application that has been submitted to the Scottish Government's Energy Consent Unit and the Council as a consultee. The proposal itself relates to rough grazing ground that sits between the B7078 and the M74, and the proposed battery storage facility would connect to a proposed substation some 300 metres south of the application site itself. With regards to the assessment against the relevant national and local development plan policies, the proposals are acceptable and no objections have been received from the bodies consulted. As with the earlier proposals for Red Moss, a number of conditions have been recommended and contributions will be sought for community infrastructure, and this will be a matter that will be determined by the Energy Consents Unit. So therefore, it is recommended that no objection should be submitted as the formal response from South Lanarkshire Council to the Energy Consents Unit of the Scottish Government.
Thank you very much. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. If there are no questions or comments, then I will run through the recommendations that we will be approving. Recommendation 1 is that the Scottish Government Energy Consents Unit is informed that South Lanarkshire Council has no objection to the granting of consent under Section 36 of the Electricity Act 1989, and that 2, the head of the Planning and Regulatory Services be authorised to undertake any discussions with the Scottish Government Energy Consents Unit, including in relation to conditions to be attached to the consent if required. I will move those recommendations.
I'll second the Chair.
All agreed? Thank you. We will then move on, please, to agenda item number 11, and that is application P241492, and that's for the erection of house for retiring farm worker at Burnwind Farm, A723, from Straven to Hamilton, and these on pages 101 to 108. Fraser?
Chair, this application seeks consent for a dwelling house, which it is suggested in the submission is for a retiring farm worker. However, as noted in the planning history, the property at this site is domestic and there is no agricultural business or farm. As such, this proposal runs contrary to the Greenbelt policies in the South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan, as no evidence has been provided of a specific locational need for a dwelling at this location and there is no viable farm business. Notwithstanding the policy conflicts that exist, in assessing this application it is also noted that the road service have confirmed that access to the site is substandard and any additional traffic could pose a threat to road safety, and as such have objected to the proposal. Therefore, for the policy and practical reasons set out in section 11, it is recommended that application P241492 should be refused.
Thank you, Fraser. Open up for questions or comments, and I'll take Councillor Clark first, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Fraser for the report. You've said one of the reasons for refusal is there's no existing agricultural business there. Would that consideration change if the application for the equine business operation, if that was approved, would that change that consideration?
It wouldn't change. No, there needs to be a requirement for a house on the side. It needs to be there needs to be a viable business which requires someone to stay on the side. The fact that it may be a farm business or an equine business doesn't necessarily then provide the justification for a single house in itself. So there's no justification. There isn't a business here at all. But even if a business was established, that wouldn't necessarily guarantee that there would be a need for a house on there. That there's a whole separate process that would be around that.
Thank you. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know if you've any more background on this one, Fraser. No viable farm business here. Is that because in the past the landowner has had to go out and get work elsewhere and is now retiring from wherever he got that other job, and this is the land he owns, So therefore it would be where he would want to have a retirement home. I don't know. Have you looked into it in that depth? Because it's never always as straightforward.
As far as we're aware, the applicant owns the residential property that's next door. There was a kind of stables, but it was a field that was used for training horses, but more for a domestic purpose as well. So there isn't actually, it's a family that lives on that site itself. There isn't a requirement for a retiring farmer to move on to that site because there isn't a retiring farmer, as far as we're aware. And there isn't a farm business that sits there as well. So, so as far as it's the premise of the application isn't backed up by the information that's been provided to us in terms of a business that's there that requires a house on that site. So therefore, the Greenbelt policies kick in, which don't that don't encourage development like this within the Greenbelt area.
Yeah, it was a slightly different point. I was asking about whether, I mean, it is called Burney Wynd Farm. So did that, in the end, cease to be a farm because it was unviable, and therefore the person who owns and maybe stays there just now had to go out and get other agricultural employment, and he's now ready to retire. So he is a retiring farmer, if you like, and this is the land he owns. I'm just, for clarity.
That's me. It's not been a viable, or it's not been a farm business for a considerable period of time. As far as we're aware, the fields may have been, whether they're sold off or let off. As I say, it was used as a kind of horse grazing area as part of a domestic property. But there isn't a farmer who's on that particular site that needs to move into this home. It's not a retiring business, so it's effectively an application for a single house within the Greenbelt.
Thank you, Fraser. Councillor Clark, supplementary.
Thank you, Chair, for taking me in again. I know in it the objection from Roads Transportation Fleet Services, just looking for some more, a greater explanation of that, and is that not something that can be addressed by any conditions?
Thanks, Councillor. The reason for the objection was that the access wasn't wide enough to accommodate two-way traffic, and that means that you could have traffic that's waiting to turn right into the site on the 723, which is a national speed limit road, and speeds will be around 60 miles an hour. I think the red line boundary is very close to the access, so in terms of being able to accommodate that within the red line boundary, I don't think it would be possible. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Fraser. Yeah, it is a very tight, narrow road coming into it. Any further questions or comments? If there are no further questions or comments, then the recommendation is refused. I will move that recommendation.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed. Thank you. Agenda item number 12 is application P250-3 for the erection of horse training centre for proposed equine business operation at Burnwynd Farm, A723 from Straven to Hamilton, pages 109 to 114. And Fraser, please.
Thanks, Chair. This application is in the same vicinity as item 11 and seeks consent for a horse training centre with offices, training rooms, staff areas for what is suggested as a proposed equine business. As with the earlier application, the road service have objected to this proposal as the access to the site is substandard and is considered to be a danger to traffic safety. In addition to this, it is noted that there is no business on this site at present, and as such, within the terms of the adopted local development plan, there is no justification for these business premises. So therefore, for the reasons set out in section 11, it is recommended that application P250333 should be refused.
Thank you. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. Councillor Allison.
Can I maybe just have some further information from Fraser Jack on the roads? Did any discussions take place regarding the access, etc.? The Did the applicant give any indication that they may have been able to identify a better junction? Is that the only objection you have? Because this is a business that can only happen in the rural area. You can't put it in an urban area, so therefore surely it's the type of business you would be looking for in the rural area, but it would need to have proper access. Have these discussions taken place?
Just before I ask Fraser to come in, I don't know if MD had been to visit the site, but if he'd actually been to visit the site, which you're more than entitled to do as a member of the committee, you would see the actual access to it. It doesn't fit for me, and it actually does prove some concerns if we did have to approve it. But I'll ask Fraser just to come in, but that's only my interpretation of actually seeing the actual route into it. So I'll ask Fraser just to come in first, because for me it just doesn't fit, and there is a health and safety avenue around about that. Fraser?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. No, we assessed the application just with the plans. There was no discussion with the applicant.
Would it be possible to have these discussions, or do you believe there's nothing that can be done here?
I'll ask Fraser just to Fraser Carlin.
Okay.
No. No, I think as suggested, Councillor, no, it's that we have to deal with the application as presented, and as I said, your light's on. I don't know if you're. No, sorry. No, it's the application as presented. As you say, an equine business is something that would be appropriate within a greenbelt location, but here there are issues around the proposals as presented. If the applicant owns other land, other areas in there, and they want to come back in with a revised proposal, then we can take that into consideration, but we have to take the application as presented just now. We can't then have further discussions about site that are not within their ownership, or base it on maybe other assumptions around it. So the application is presented as along a substandard site just now. Obviously members know that they can visit the site, they can look at Google Maps, and there's information that's presented to members as well, which provides a good description of the site, and that leads to the recommendation for refusal from the road service. But if an applicant has other areas that might sit within their ownership, they've got another site that they're looking at, then they know that they're welcome to come back in and discuss it with us.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments then? Councillor Mary Donnelly.
Do you know where the horses are stabled at the moment? No, you don't know anything about that?
No, that's all right.
Right. There's no horses? Right, okay.
Any further questions or comments then? If there are no further questions or comments then, the recommendation is to refuse. I will move that refusal.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 13. There are no items of urgent business. I will ask Stuart and the clerk just to stop the recording of the meeting and wish you all an enjoyable day. Thank you very much.